So I went out and I found him 3 amethysts and I brought it back. He's like, "Oh, thank you. You've done me such a great help. Let me reward you. Here's a vial of poison." Like, that was his plan. Like, if you find this thing from you, I'll just give you some poison.
I don't know what you're going to do with it, but I'm okay with whatever you choose. Welcome back to Cartridge Space Radio. I'm Donald, once again joined by Brad.
Hello.
And we are getting, halfway through our fall of 97?
Most of the way, actually. This is, we've got this show and 2 more after this, and then we are done with 1997.
Oh, man. We're going to have to say goodbye to 97 again.
So hard the first time, it's not going to get easier.
I was a youth then. I am not a youth now.
I just put up my Blur posters again.
They look really great there in the background. We're here to talk about possibly one of my favorite games of all time.
Well, I mean, I can't speak for you. It's certainly one of mine. Arguably number 1. Definitely top 5 for sure.
We're going to talk Castlevania Symphony of the Night. But before we start, Brad, this is not our big question. I just want to ask you a little question.
Sure.
What is the most badass thing you've ever done?
In general?
Sure.
Okay. About 5 years ago, I went on a backpacking trip around Mount Rainier. That was like a 40-mile hike with pretty tough elevations. And I had to carry all my gear on my back, and I had no idea what I was doing, so I took way too much stuff. That was kind of badass.
At the beginning of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Death shows up and tells Alucard to turn back. And Alucard says, "I will not." And I realized he's talking to Death, the Grim Reaper, who told them to do something, and he says, "Nope." And Death's like, "Oh, man, well, I'll get you for that." And he takes all your equipment away and leaves. He doesn't attack you, so he's not like, "I'm here to repel your attack." He was just there to ask you nicely, and Alucard was like, "No, Death, no, I will not."
Well, to be fair, Alucard is a vampire, so he's already, died. So, I'm not sure what Death could really do. It'd be like, "I'll kill you again." And Alucard's like, "Yeah?"
I don't really want to walk on your lore, but Alucard didn't die because he's a halfling, so he was born that way. Jeez, do you even play video games, nerd?
And now that I've burned all my credibility, this is going to be a great show.
You want to tell us all about Castlevania Symphony of the Night?
Sure. Castlevania Symphony of the Night came out in the U.S. in October 1997. I don't have the exact date, but I believe it was kind of in the middle of the month, maybe around 14th, 15th. It had originally been scheduled to come out in the spring, and I was very, very excited about that. And very put out when it got delayed for 5 months. I remember in the spring, all the magazines wrote all these glowing reviews, and I was like, "Oh man, this looks amazing." And then a whole summer went by with no Castlevania. It kind of sucked. This is a really slow summer that year, too, and low quantity of titles overall. It was later ported over to the Saturn, where they put back in some areas that they had taken out and added some enemies and did a little bit of touching up, some color changes and such. But they had to take out a lot because the Saturn, for being this vaunted, awesome 2D system that everybody, remembers it as, actually couldn't handle some of the graphical effects that the PlayStation was pulling off. So there's your Castlevania history. It was, I'd say maybe the 5th or 6th game in the series. I don't even know. There were 3 on the NES, 2 on the Super Nintendo, and then I think this one.
There was one on the Genesis, Bloodlines, because this is the sequel to Bloodlines.
That is technically accurate, although actually the opening of Castlevania Symphony of the Night has a scene that's supposed to be from the previous game. It's actually from another game entirely. It's from a game called Rondo of Blood, which is a fantastic title. And that was a PC Engine game, which is what they called the TurboGrafx in Japan, I guess. So that's what that was. they made a really bad conversion of for the Super Nintendo, now that I think about it, that wasn't really the same game. But anyway, I think it was called Dracula X.
I think that got renamed Bloodlines for the Genesis.
Bloodlines was different.
I thought it referenced Bloodlines.
It calls it Bloodlines. Like, it pops up and it says Bloodlines, but it's not actually like Bloodlines takes place during World War I.
Well, maybe he was off while they were doing World War I stuff. Like, I'm going to fight this castle, nerds. But how do you say that dude's name? Is it Richter or Richard?
According to the voiceovers in the game, it's Richter, according to Maria.
Richter. So this all opens very dramatically.
With the greatest intro ever.
A fight with Dracula that isn't really worthy of a Castlevania experience at all. Like, this is the easiest boss fight in the entire game, which it should be since it's the first one. But it is not like the boss fight you would want with Dracula. But it opens up and, man, Dracula should be killed by just how awful of a monologuer he is.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets. But enough talk. Have at you.
And it's important to note that the voice acting for this opening scene was done inside of soup cans. Because it's super echoey.
It's also very cheesy, but you almost don't want to blame the voice actors for how bad it is, because the opening line of the game is, "Die, monster! You don't belong in this world." And I don't think there's a reading of that line that is ever gonna sound good. You know, like, you could get like Morgan Freeman or Ian McKellen or Charles Dance, and it's just never gonna sound good.
But before that, a very important thing we forgot to mention is exactly how late 90s the Konami logo is in this game. It like erupts from the ground with bad CG dirt. And you're like, what are you guys doing? It's like when they're looking at movies doing like really great remakes of their logos, they're like, we can do that too. And no one was bold enough to say, we should not have done this.
I think maybe they had played Resident Evil and the Capcom logo came up where it's like going through space and there's lasers around it or something. Like, oh, we can do better than that.
Not realizing what Capcom did was not better than just putting their name on the screen. I mean, that's not here or there. But after you defeat Dracula, and if you somehow manage to not beat him and he actually hurts you, Maria runs on and starts praying for you and gives you invincibility. Because I imagine someone was like, oh, dudes, if they die in the scene, it's going to game over and they're going to have to redo the whole opening again. Well, we'll just make them invincible to make sure they do succeed. Then you are treated to a wall of text because it was 1997 and they had just lived through the whole die monster debacle of the beginning of this game. And I never noticed this before, and maybe it's me getting older, but in there, the High Priest Shaft resurrected Dracula. Is this the same Shaft as in the American classic movie Shaft? And why is he resurrecting Dracula? I'm
sure if I had like a couple more minutes to prepare, I could come up with some kind of line about who's the man that brings Dracula back from the dead. Shaft! Can you dig it?
What you going to do, Shaft? I'm going to resurrect Dracula. But I doubt it's the same one, but I was like, that's not like a high fantasy name at all. It's like, I am Richter. Yo, I'm the High Priest Shaft. Kind of weird name is that? So Alucard decides he's had enough of his dad's shenanigans again.
God, Dad, knock it off with the castles.
Always putting castles on mountains. Ugh. So he goes running through the forest with some owls.
Is the purpose of that scene to like show like, look, like he's running, he's not even on horseback or anything, like he's faster than an owl. It's amazing.
I've seen owls fly before and I've never been like, oh man, that owl is going so fast. It's usually like, is that thing gonna stay airborne or just drop? I don't know. So he outruns an owl, which the only person who knows that happened is the owl, and he's not going to tell anyone. And then you just plow your way through the beginning of this game because you have all the best equipment in the world. And then Death takes it away. Death's basically like, you won't do what I say? Yeah, and takes all your fun toys and he goes home. The game's like, you know what you need? To just punch some fools. So you start punching fools.
You want to box these zombies. Yeah, it's a technique that some games do where they sort of start you off like either in like the entire game becomes a flashback, or like they just start you out very powerful and then like you lose your power somehow. It's kind of like a little way to get you to like kind of preview like this is what it's going to be like if you stick with it to the end of the game and you're going to be very powerful. Like this is what you'll get to do. Castlevania is a little weird in that first you get the intro scene with Richter, then you get Alucard like with all the cool equipment. So it's like a double false start almost. You know, it's like, oh, you're going to do this and then you're going to be this guy, and no, actually you suck. Go punch a zombie.
It pretty quickly starts giving you stuff, though, to make you survivable. The first thing that I was faced with when playing this game is most of these games that we've gone back to, I've looked at them and been like, boy, this aged poorly. The coat of paint my memory has painted over this made this look a lot better. Symphony of the Night looked exactly like I remembered because it is still gorgeous.
Yeah.
Their pixel art is still so good.
It is, I would say, probably about as good as graphics as you can have in kind of that old school game art kind of graphic style. You know, where it's slightly pixelated and most things have a dark outline. You can make a 2D game that is in a higher resolution or a little more detailed, but it starts to look more like anime or like something not video game specific. Like that game look, I think Castlevania takes it about as far as you can go with that look.
Everything has so many frames of animation and it's all super smooth. I did remember if you face Alucard backwards and use the backward dodge, you can move across that castle really fast. Like, the AI is not quite sure what you're doing. It's like, oh, here he comes. Goodbye. And Alucard's just staring at him in the eyes as he slides backwards across the floor.
It was kind of an odd decision that, you know, you get 2 attack buttons, a jump button, and then the triangle button is just dedicated to moonwalking.
They played that Michael Jackson game and they're like, oh, this game's phenomenal. We got a moonwalk too. Yeah, 2 attack buttons. That's a bit weird since the sword, basically the graphics on the early swords all look the same. So you're like, am I swinging my secondary sword? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, usually you end up kind of just putting a shield in that other hand. So it becomes, instead of an attack button, like a block button. But, you know, the option's there to just like do double swords if you want.
But shields are for the weak. You're Alucard, you shouldn't need a shield. You can turn into a mist and just float through a gate. Why do you need a shield? Just mist. You can also turn into a wolf, and he is the most fancy wolf you have ever seen in a video game. He's got like a cool saddlebag, and he carries all of Alucard's stuff. He's not super fast, so I don't know the reason to be the wolf, other than, you know, squeeze through little passages. But he's just like, I'm walking through this castle. It's no big deal. And why does no one in this castle respect you? It's your dad's castle. It should be like, hey, Alucard. It's like, don't throw that bone at me. Skeleton, don't throw that bone at me. But he does.
So this kind of brings me to one of the questions I had about this game is that Dracula's castle appears and it's full of monsters. And I don't know if like Dracula invited the monsters or like went out and gathered them and put them in his castle, or if they just kind of show up. Does Dracula even like want monsters there? If he goes walking through his castle, do they also throw bones at him?
If you saw Dracula, would you throw a bone at him?
Well, I'm not a skeleton. So, I mean, if I was a skeleton, I don't think I'd throw my own bones at anybody, but these things do it.
They always throw the femur. So I think they just have a bag of femurs at their side. But I think to answer your question, we're looking at like a Noah's Ark kind of situation.
Okay.
He's like, I gotta collect all these monsters so they don't go extinct before my castle vanishes. And then when it reappears, he's like, if anyone tries to come get me, they have to deal with all this crap first. And like any boss in any game, they just try to weaken you before you get to them.
I like to imagine that Dracula is kind of like interior decorating his castle with all these monsters. He's like, oh, you know what this lagoon needs is some ice wraiths that, come up and throw ice shards at you. And the library could use some more floating heads and a skeleton who holds a skull in one hand and has a lightning sword. That would really spruce up the library.
Okay, now I just want to see a HGTV where he swaps with his neighbors and they try to redecorate a room in each other's houses. And he's like, I have turned your sitting room into a place where these goos that will melt you if you walk into them. And they're like, this is not what we wanted at all. We made you a flower room. He's like, this is exactly what I wanted. So, should we talk about the big twist at the ending?
Yeah, I think we can shoot off some spoilers for a game that came out 2 decades ago.
It's not Dracula at the end.
No.
No, you are shocked to find out it's actually Richter.
Very nice.
Who brought the castle back because he is like, I'm tired of people not respecting the Belmonts, and I'm the evil lord now. And Alucard's like, oh man, this is crap. And Maria's like, Richter, what are you doing? And then you gotta fight him because, I don't know, he has some sort of Dracula obsession. I don't know what you'd call it. He shouldn't have summoned the castle. That's bad deal.
I mean, it turns out that the whole time he was being controlled by the dark priest Shaft, who was doing it all as a way to resurrect Dracula, because normally Dracula only resurrects like every 100 years, and this was like 4 years goes by and Shaft's just like, I'm really sad there's no Dracula, and I don't want to wait 96 more years. I wonder if I could do something about this.
Okay, I have a theory right now that I just came up with.
Okay.
Is that whole opening in this game actually just like Shaft playing with action figures like in Spaceballs? And he like walks Richter's character and he's like, die, you monster. And could that just be Shaft in his like plotting stage, but then he starts playing with the figures?
That would really help explain why the opening dialogue is so cheesy. If you're just imagining like Shaft playing with little dolls, and he's like, it was not by my hand that I'm once again given flesh.
And then he brings a little Maria and he's like, no, Richter. And someone walks in, are you High Priest Shaft? What did you see? I did not see you playing with your dolls again. Good. So, we have now explained the beginning of Symphony of the Night, because after that, what voice acting there is in the game isn't terrible.
No, it is totally adequate, which for 1997 is a stunning achievement.
He's kind of got this spooky, I'm a dark, twisted emo prince thing going on. But maybe they added that voice acting or that whole first section later. Like, oh, we need to explain part of this story. We better add this part.
The only problem with that theory is it doesn't explain the librarian, who is both poorly acted and gets brilliant lines like, young master, I can't oppose one who goes against the master.
I was like, did he just use master twice in this sentence?
About 2 different people.
And then Alucard's like, I'll make it worth your time. And he's like, well, in that case, what do you need?
Yeah, it doesn't take much to convince him. Like, you don't even have to, like, specify a dollar amount or anything. It's just like, I'll give you a bribe, a indeterminate bribe of some sort. Might just be a back rub.
I've got Dad's black card. I mean, this really is a story about a teenage son who's a couple 100 years old acting out against his dad.
Pretty much.
Dad, I'm gonna kill you again. You kill me and I resurrect and then I'm mad. I'm gonna do it anyway, Dad. So, one of the big things about Symphony of the Night, and this was kind of telegraphed in the name, is the music in this game is amazing.
90% amazing and 10% cheesy.
Okay, when you have 90% of the soundtrack just so good, you can forget the 10% where they're like, oh man, we forgot to make music for this section. But the clock tower.
Yes.
That is my all-time favorite music in this game. Because you kind of got like this cool gothic vibe, and then they're like, hey, we heard you kids like electric guitar. It's so good, and the first time you hear it, you're like, wow, this is so good. This game is so good.
That's the part that it sounds like it's the theme from the X-Men cartoon from around that time also.
Yes, it is that part. Where you go out there and you're like, yeah, a new zone. And then they instantly pull the rug out from under you and you're like, I'm going to need a double jump to get through this zone. Time to go to a different zone.
Time to retrace my steps.
It pretty quickly starts saying you're going to need special powers to go here, here, and here. And it's a big castle. Good luck. That is one of the best things about Castlevania games. There is the cheater weapon in this game, the stopwatch, which you basically can use to run over any boss in this game, especially Shadow Alucard near the beginning. When he pops out, if you pop the stopwatch before he jumps, you can kill him before that stopwatch runs out.
Kind of wish I had thought of that because that was a hard fight for me. If you don't stopwatch, his patterns are pretty tough. He counters pretty much everything you do.
Shadow Alucard is brutal.
He can't do a ton of damage unless he hits you with his bat attack, which he has all the transformations, like, right at that point.
It's actual bats, like the animal. He doesn't just pull out a Louisville Slugger and smack you upside the head.
Oh, that would be amazing, too.
So the first thing I did when I fired this up, other than grin stupidly for like a half an hour, was made my way to the first boss. And man, I remembered exactly how to do that. It was just complete instinct and just ran him over real quick. And it's just so fun. You get weapons and equipments, you're getting powers, and you're like, I'm so good at this game. And then it's like, hey, now that we got you comfortable, we're going to start abusing you horribly and killing you all the time. And it wouldn't be that bad, but you have the game over with the stupid game over voice. And then it kicks you back to the main screen, which then you have to load your game to go back.
Yeah.
Did no one see a problem with this game over loop at all? We're like, oh, you died. Why don't you go outside and play?
Dying has consequences. You lose all your progress since your last save point. Plus, you have to go through all the intro menus and loading screens and everything. So, you die. Even if you had just saved, you're still looking at like a 2 to 3 minute, setback before you're playing again.
Yeah, the load times, I don't remember them on the PlayStation, but on a system that's quite a bit more powerful than a PlayStation, they still weren't great.
Yeah.
I don't know. That part of that game had apparently vanished in the depths of my mind. And I just remembered all the cool stuff from the game. Like, early on when you're running through this hallway, there's a giant eyeball in the background watching you.
Yep.
If you've played it more than one time, you know, oh, I'm going to be fighting that giant eyeball. I guess I'd forgotten he does that, and I kept like, oh, there you are, just staring at me. Weirdo.
That section's especially awesome because you're in a hallway, and then there's columns kind of in the background, and then behind those is the windows that look out into a forest, and the eye is also looking in the window. You've got 3 layers going. They all move at different speeds for a parallax effect that gives it an illusion of depth. It's really, really cool area. There are so many impressive graphical touches, 2D lighting effects, transparencies, different layers. Just, there's a whole lot going on in this game that, like some of the candles will have like halos of like almost transparent color filter that just creates like a light halo around the candle. A lot of cool stuff like that.
Yeah, like we said before, this is a beautiful, beautiful game that holds up way better than the polygon game. And this game does have the occasional polygons in the background, but they weren't trying to do a lot with them. It's just for like subtle rotation of something as you run by to give you a feeling of like this floor on is kind of arcing around a corner. When it's not, it's just a visual trick. It's very neat. And, as you progress, you get more and more powerful for, all the big final showdowns. I love Castlevania Symphony of the Night so much.
You almost wonder what games we could have gotten if there had been a little more interest in 2D gaming on the PlayStation. Because, like Tomb Raider had already been out for a year, Mario 64 had been out on the N64. 3D was the way that things were going. It was what people wanted to play. But you see a game like this, and it just seems like you could have had some really beautiful stuff if the interest had been there. If you just take what Castlevania started with and started to build off of that, you probably would have gotten some really, really incredible looking games by the time the PlayStation ended.
I remember back then I was like, oh, 3D, 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 it's so neat. But throwing the horsepower of the PlayStation behind this game, first off, it's got a CD size to hold a mass amount of sprites. And it's got the CD to hold beautiful music. And I mean, don't get me wrong, like Super Castlevania was a very pretty game, but it was nowhere in the scope of Symphony of the Night as far as what they're doing with art.
Yeah,
I agree with you. If that had been pushed forward, 2D games have made a comeback in a big way in the recent years. I'm not going to say it's easier for independent developers to make them, because making pixel art is a huge task for small teams, but we seem to be going through a renaissance of this type of game.
Yeah.
You even have like Bloodstained, the Kickstarter that is coming out from the maker of Symphony of the Night.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have 2D pixel art. It's using like polygons and a side view, which I don't know how I feel about. But if it feels like Symphony of the Night, I mean, that's what's important, because this game feels really, really good to play. Like very tight combat, very responsive to what you're asking it to do.
Yeah.
Probably better than any of the other games we've talked about so far, because they had been doing 2D for so long. They should know how to do this game on a more powerful platform. Fun little thing that I discovered in this game, and when I saw it, it's like, this is a little bit crazy. You meet Maria early on in this game, and she's standing besides this giant clock.
Yeah.
And throughout the game, this clock will get into different positions, which will cause different things around the castle to happen. But I know you haven't played Bloodborne. In the DLC, you fight a character called Maria, the Lady of the Astral Clock.
Well then, it's a nice little shout out.
I never put two and two together until that moment where she's standing by the giant clock that controls all this crazy stuff. But one thing I forgot about was the CD halls in this game, where you walk through a hall that actually has a picture of a CD-ROM and it says CD above it. I remember the day I read that some developers find like, yeah, that's where the game loads the next section, just in that hallway.
Except it doesn't, because after you walk through that room, it brings up a loading screen. And then you get to like make the text wave around. If you press the buttons on the controller, it gets wavier.
It depends on how long you hang out in the hall.
How long are you hanging out in this empty hallway that's like one screen long?
If you don't want to see the load screen, for a little bit.
Yeah, but on the load screen, you can make it wavy.
They should have had a guy who's like, Master Alucard, would you like to play ping pong for a second? Oh, sweet. Ping pong for a minute. He's like, oh, the next zone is loaded. All right. It's just the librarian following around. It's like, a game of ping pong will cost you another back rub.
Young master.
Dracula's like, have you been hanging around the librarian? I told you to stay away from him. Get a bad vibe from him.
Something not right about that guy.
Shut up, Dad. He's my friend.
Every time you buy something in the library, I think he's supposed to be saying thank you, but he giggles, and then he says something that it sounds like he's going, hee, like you. Like, just don't, so like if you sell him like 5 or 6 gems that you found, he's just like, hee, like you. It's like, this is really uncomfortable.
Alucard's like, did you say like me? He's like, no, thank you. I said thank you. All right.
This show being what it is, we like to talk about the geography in games a lot. This isn't really geography because it all takes place in one building, but like building design The Castlevania castle, I don't know if, like, Dracula, like, builds it with his mind or whatever, but however it's being made, whoever designed it doesn't know anything about how to, like, lay out a building. And it goes beyond just that there's, like, one very structurally unsound tower that's, like, way off, dangling off the side of the castle that, is just being held up by a stairway. Like, there's no underneath support. Probably not good construction there, but just none of the layout of this castle really makes much sense.
If you go all the way to the outer wall, from where you start, if you just keep walking right,
yeah,
you'll reach the outer wall. If you travel down the outer wall and drop through the floor, there's like a wooden boat hanging off the bottom of the castle just by 2 ropes.
Yeah.
With a spying glass, you can look out at the water for various reasons. But they just have a boat hanging off the bottom of the castle to catch people who happen to fall out the bottom because there's just a hole.
They're like, oh man, we forgot to put a floor on the tower. Just strap a boat on there.
Instead of like, we should finish this floor, they're like, hey, do we have a boat we can hoist up to this castle that's on the top of a cliff? Because that seems smarter. Or is that like Dracula's getaway boat? He jumps in and cuts the ropes and he's like, haha, fools.
So long, suckers. I mean, they built this castle over like there's like a abandoned mine and some caverns, and they're full of water. Like, structurally, this is unsound. If you're gonna, like, build a house, you wouldn't build it, like, over a bunch of subterranean caves that were full of water. Because that would collapse.
A house is not as heavy as a castle.
Yeah.
So one hard rain and those tunnels fill with water, you're going to get just that whole cliffside to fall. And then that whole castle ends up in the lake down below. So all the Belmonts really had to do was start hucking buckets of water down into those caves and be like, so long, Dracula.
I mean, underneath the castle, there's an abandoned mine, and I just want to know, like, did they have a mine first? And they're like, hey, we're kind of done. Like, we got all the gold or whatever out of the ground. Let's just build a castle over the top of this mine.
Maybe there was no mine there, and Dracula's like, you got to build me a castle. So they started digging the rocks and supplies they needed out of the dirt or the ground, and just started building the castle directly on top of it. And they're like, this is fine. We have a boat in case it falls. Maybe there's a boat on the other side, and if the castle lands in the water, they're like, this is a castle pontoon.
Castle just floats away. It's not that Dracula's castle reappears every 100 years. It just, floats back into floats back into town every century or so. Other times it's just like at a different part of the sea.
It's just zombies with oars like, Dracula's like, I hate all of you. Get my castle back up on that cliff. Just takes him 100 years to get back.
This castle also has a coliseum in it, and the coliseum's like near the top of the castle. So, just upstairs arena, as you do. And I don't know what the purpose of that is, because it seems like the only person who really would live there and, like, get to enjoy whatever's happening in the Coliseum would be, like, Dracula, or in the case of this game, Richter. It shows that he's just kind of, like, sitting alone in this big, empty Coliseum, and that seems kind of sad. That's like being the owner of the Florida Panthers, where you're just like watching sports in this empty building all by yourself, and you're like, this is all mine, and it's lonely here.
Well, it gives him a great reason to look really bored when he walked in. He's like, oh, someone came to my arena. Boring. I don't remember which Castlevania it is. I think it was the Game Boy Circle of the Moon. There was a prayer confessional you could go sit in.
Oh, that's in Symphony.
I think they double dipped there.
Okay.
Because I remember I was really mad when they did it in Circle of the Moon.
Yeah.
But yeah, you sit down in the prayer confessional, and you're like, forgive me, Father, I have... And then he stabs you with 100 spears. And he's like, ha! Alucard's like, that's why I don't go to church anymore, Dad.
You can also sit on the other side and, like, some ghost woman will come and confess her sins to you. But you don't get to stab her with a bunch of spears.
I wish there's like, press triangle to stab with spears. Yeah, you go through your adventure. Obviously, you win. Probably best because what we just discovered, it was doomed from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, the ending is that the castle crumbles into the sea, and I can't say for sure that that was specifically because of Alucard or if it was just, like, coincidental timing.
The opening would have been amazing if Richter walked in. He's like, die, monster. And Dracula's like, don't move. Do not take one more step forward. Why? Because this is a room that is held up by nothing but stairs. If you take one more step, it will fall off the castle. Maria runs in, Richter! And Dracula's like, ah, crap. Oh, did not mention, how you save your game is actually pretty neat. You walk into an empty room. There's a floating, like, Dungeons and Dragons D20, and you press up and it breaks apart and turns into a coffin. You're like, wow, this is the most metal thing in the entire game. Because he's like, I saved my game by sleeping in a coffin. I don't know. It's still so good. Like, it holds up, like we said before, much better than 90% of the stuff from the PlayStation era.
Yeah.
As visuals go and music goes. Maybe not voice acting. It has strong competition with the Capcom classic Resident Evil. Die monsters are right up there with Jill Sandwich.
Master of Unlocking.
So, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. It's good.
Understated review of the year.
It boggled our tendency to look at geography and try to figure it out. Like, they have a place called the Long Library.
Yes.
Does that mean somewhere in the castle they're like the short library?
The funny thing about the long library is it's not nearly as long as the Marble Gallery, which, you know, isn't even like the long Marble Gallery or, you know, even like the pretty big Marble Gallery. It's just like,
I mean, that might mean there is another library in the castle that's half the size, which would make this the long library and that's the short library. So where Alucard keeps all his coloring books is the short library. He messed up the good books in the long library. So they're like, you get your own library. Servants, build him his own library.
Just stick it on the side of the castle without any structures underneath it to hold it up. It'll be fine.
Don't worry about it. Nothing has fallen off yet. Except for, well, the whole castle fell off that one time. But don't think about it too hard. So, any closing thoughts on Symphony of the Night?
You know, Symphony of the Night is available on most of the current platforms, so if somehow you haven't played it, there really isn't much reason not to. Like, just go out, play it now. It's on PSN. It was on Xbox 360, and you can play it on the Xbox One. You won't regret it. It's a really solid, well-made game. There is so much stuff in this game. It's ridiculous. Like, there are enemies that only appear in like one little section of the entire castle, and they are fully fledged with like multiple types of attacks and little detailed animations. Like, there's an incredible amount of content in this game to check out.
Early on, you are going to walk past things that you think are just a cool looking background. And 7-8 hours in, you're going to get something and be like, oh, holy crap, I walked by something really important in the first 40 seconds of this game that changes everything, and I had no idea I did it. It's so good. So that will do it for Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Probably the best PlayStation 1 game there was.
I would definitely say so.
And next week, we are going to be Ranchers of Monsters.
Yes.
So that will do it for Cartridge Based Radio this week. If you want to get a hold of us, all that information is in the show notes. I'm Donald. That was Brad. And we will see you next week.
Richter.